So at this time, I'd like to introduce a longtime friend of mine, Raplh.
Okay, hi, my name is Raplh Whitkin, and I'm an alcoholic. And this time I'll thank Keith for inviting me to come out here and speak. A lot of people call this an honor and a privilege. I never have. I was told by my first sponsor that it is a responsibility that I had better learn to live up to. I didn't like any part of that. I didn't like the idea of responsibility. And then he had a lot of "you had betters." A couple of people here probably knew him. I think Adam knew him. Yeah, I'm sure Adam knew him, and Jane must have known him, and I know Gail's sponsor knew him. They had the same home group. His name was Mike Ross. He's dead now, almost 33 years, but I'm wearing a jacket and tie because I know he would want me to. So, you know, I'm sober a lot longer without his guidance than I was with it, but I'm living today off what he taught me. Anyway, my wife spoke for 10 minutes. I've got 43 left to correct her, so that should work out. Anyway, okay, my sobriety date's January 10th, 1984. My home group is Steps to Freedom in Henderson. And I grew up in Van Nuys, California. I never really thought much about my childhood as an adult until I got into AA and I heard everybody else complaining about theirs. If I was to review mine, I'd say probably, I lived in a neighborhood where we were all pretty much about the same. These were tract houses built in 1950. Almost everybody was a GI with a young family buying their first home. My dad was in the Navy in World War II. So all the kids were within a couple, 3 years, one way or the other of each other, age-wise and all that. And maybe a third of the kids had it better than me. Maybe a third of the kids had it worse than me. And probably a third of the kids had it about the same as me. It was no big thing one way or the other. It has nothing to do with, you know, my alcoholism. My sister grew up in the same house, went to the same schools. To my knowledge, she was drunk once in her life. She was a senior in high school. Friday night, she went out with her girlfriends and they got drunk. She had a hangover Saturday morning, decided that was dumb and never did it again. She did a little drinking after that, but she was never drunk after that. She was drunk one time, lifetime. My father drank for over 60 years. I don't think he was ever drunk. You know, he'd go into a restaurant, he'd have a drink while waiting for his dinner, or he'd go to a wedding and have one, maybe two drinks to toast the couple or something like that. I've done work on a family tree. I've gone back to the 1840s in Europe, and the only alcoholism I can find is mine. You know, my family's been in this country about 115, 118 years now, something like that. And there's been a total of 5 arrests that I'm aware of. 4 of those are mine. And one was my grandmother back in the 30s with some kind of a union sweatshop thing, which probably wouldn't have been an arrest in modern times. So I know a lot of people in AA grew up in alcoholic homes, and I'm sure that was crazy, wild, and nutty, and probably rough at times. And what I had was different. I'm not saying it was better or easier or worse or anything else, but it was different because I got questions like, why would you do that? We've never done that. Your sister doesn't do that. Your cousins never did that. Why would you do that? Anyway, none of that has anything to do with anything, but that's what happened. I actually did not drink as a kid. I was over 21 when I had my first drink. It just didn't occur to me to drink before that. I knew a few people in high school that did some weekend beer drinking. They never asked me to join them. I never asked them if I could. Just didn't occur to me. I saw some alcoholism early. I started working young, and I worked around the construction industry, so I saw that kind of laborers. And there's a high level of alcoholism, or certainly heavy drinking among that trade. And I just thought that's what these guys like to do. It was fun for them, and it was a matter of choice. I never believed there was any potential danger in drinking because I knew there was a stamp on the bottle. The federal government approved it, and the bars, liquor stores, and restaurants all had a state license authorizing them to sell it. So there was no doubt in my mind that there was any danger. But the reason I was a little over 21 when I had my first drink is because I was in Vietnam when I turned 21. And the ambiance there wasn't quite suitable for momentous occasion as my first drink. I took an R&R to Sydney, Australia 2 months later, and that's when I started drinking. I was there for a week, and it was, I think, the second night I was there, I went on a boat cruise dance. Wasn't interested in the boat, wasn't interested in the dance, and I wasn't really that interested in the drinking, but I knew there'd be girls there. I had been in Vietnam at that time about 8 months, and I saw some girl sitting there by herself. She looked good too, so I walked over, and I knew what the smooth operators from the movies would do. That's what I knew, what I saw in the movies and on television. Guys like Cary Grant and Clark Gable and those kind, So I walked over and I must have said something very clever like, "Hi, what's your name?" Anyway, and she had about a half a drink, and so I asked her if she wanted another drink, and she says, "Yeah." I said, "What are you drinking?" It was bourbon and Coke, so I ordered 2 of them. I didn't know anything. And I probably drank at the proper level of drinking that night. I drank, I don't know whether it was 3 drinks, 5 drinks, or what it was, but it was just enough where I began to feel the whiskey, but not enough where I did anything I would later regret. I did not duplicate that level of drinking with consistency much after that, but I heard when I was in college a few years earlier that one of our teachers got drafted. This was in the late 60s. And these older guys who were like 22, 23, said they should get him a bottle of scotch, because as a gift. And he seemed like the kind of guy who would drink scotch, sophisticated. And then one of the guys says, "It takes a while to acquire a taste for scotch." So I don't know what night I was in Australia. One of those nights I decided to have scotch. And it took me a while to acquire a taste for it, somewhere around the second or third swallow. I love scotch. The last drink I had was 12-year-old scotch. And the bartender was wearing a tie. So I couldn't be an alcoholic, could I? That was the thinking I had. But of course, I rushed through there. I didn't do all that much drinking in the Marine Corps because my alcoholism was definitely progressive. I started off as almost a non-drinker. Then I probably got into typical social drinking. And by that time, I was already out of the Marine Corps. Now I ended up at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where we had a lot of 3-day and sometimes a 4-day weekend. And I'd never been on the East Coast before. I grew up in Southern California. I had my car with me at Lejeune, so I would go to Florida one weekend, to Virginia one weekend, and I would drink whatever town I was in, whatever kind of setup was there. North Carolina was weird. In the smaller towns, the only thing you could get in a restaurant was beer and wine. In the bigger cities like Raleigh, et cetera, fancy place like a Holiday Inn would have bottle setups or something like that. But on base, because it's federal property, you could drink. And I remember it was 40 cents for a drink at Camp Lejeune. at the NCO club. Well, that reminds me of a bad break I got. I've had a series of bad breaks. I'm a victim. When I got to Vietnam, they had the EM club, the NCO club, and then a staff officers club. Well, I was a enlisted man, and all they had at the EM club was, I wasn't a drinker really, but all they had there was beer and wine, and then, and the beer was usually warm, almost always in a rusty can. But it was 15 cents, I remember that too. And anyway, by the time, I think a month before I became a corporal, they shut down the NCO club because there were too many problems. So yeah, I got cheated out of that. Obviously, I haven't forgotten. That was in 1970, and I'm still talking about it. Bad break. I'm sure they shut down that NCO club because I was going to be a corporal a month later. That was part of their strategy. The interesting thing, too, is shortly after I got to Vietnam, maybe a month or about 2 months, I guess it was, there were two guys. I didn't know them. I knew who they were. They were teammates. Now, I was in Recon Battalion, and we were very special. We really were. That's real. But these guys were teammates, and I can't describe it adequately, but there's no closer bond of recon teammates in combat. They're closer than twin brothers would ever be. And they were, back in battalion rear in between patrols, and they were both drunk that night. And they're back at their hooch, and one of them takes his M16, locks and loads, and the other one says, "You're not going to pull the trigger." "Yeah, I will." "No, you won't." "Yeah, I will." "Yeah." Well, he did. One died, and the other one, for all I know, could still be in federal prison. Now, what I know today is if one of them wasn't drunk, that wouldn't have happened. But again, I saw no danger in drinking, even with that kind of an experience or witnessing. Anyway, I did very little drinking in Vietnam when I came back from my R&R. I had tremendous responsibilities there. I didn't know what they really were. It was, looking back upon it now, it's kind of frightening. They gave that to a young person with limited experience, a lot of training, but limited experience, considering the risk involved with potential for mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, I must have done it right. Just last summer, I was at a reunion, and we had a memorial, and my lieutenant was there, who's a retired 3-star general now. He obviously got promoted quite nicely after he stopped supervising me. But anyway, again, my drinking at that time was not much of a big deal. I got back home to California. I started going to school on the GI Bill. I got an apartment. And there's quite a few people here in my age bracket. Being a young man, early 20s, during the 1970s, with a good job, single, in the suburbs of a major city was the time of the life. Society had been changing. It started in the 60s. The old-fashioned standards and morals had been modified. It was just a fun time to be a bar drinker, no question about it. I love piano bars. I was up and down Ventura Boulevard. That was my route. And it had a great time. Turned out later we found out there were some dangers in our activities, but we didn't know it at the time. And I was always amazed that any of us lived to be 50, but we did. Many of us did. And the beginning of my drinking was a lot of fun and very little trouble. The end of my drinking was a lot of trouble and very little fun. But it wasn't a straight line. There was some zigzags in there. A few of us were talking before the meeting about that. Even at the end of my drinking, I still had some good times. They weren't consistent, they weren't predictable, but they still would happen. As I said, there were 4 arrests. 1972, 1977, 1981, and 1983. Notice the spreads were getting shorter and shorter as time went by. I know now that's alcohol progression. And, if I'd taken a different street, it wouldn't have happened. Nothing was ever my fault. I was, just a victim of bad breaks and unusual circumstances. And being a bar drinker, I compared my life to other people. There was some guy in one of those bars I drank in who got arrested twice in the same weekend. So there's nothing wrong with my drinking. One of my drinking buddies, he had 7 drunk driving arrests. Another one had, I think, 14. And then when I'm a year sober, I saw him at a meeting, he had his 15th. These people are all dead, by the way. In fact, one night, 4 of us, it wasn't a planned thing, 4 of us ended up having dinner together. It was a very nice restaurant, still there. I think at that time we combined, the 4 of us, for 28 drunk driving arrests, sitting at one table. And by the time I was 7 years sober, I was the only one still alive. A good friend of mine, I lived back upstate New York in the mid-'70s, worked at Grocers Hotel Resort in the Catskills. And I saw the dishwashers there. They take all the empty glasses from the nightclub and the bar and throw them all, not empty, but half full, and throw them all into a big vat or something. And, so you got room temperature wine and beer and whiskey and vodka and gin and whatever, and one big tub, and they're drinking out of that thing. So I knew, I'm drinking 12-year-old scotch. I was fine. Besides, I was a young man, I worked hard, I'm a veteran, I'm single, and all that was true. And it wasn't until I got into AA that I realized, well, there were probably millions of people with the same background, and they weren't getting drunk on a nightly basis. As I say, I experienced that progression, the non-drinking, the occasional drinking, the social drinking, regular drinking, daily drinking, heavy drinking, problem drinking, and eventually, of course, alcoholic drinking. And chapter 3 describes that fairly well. When I got to the more, further up the scale there, I would occasionally revert back to a previous level or two for a little while. And that just gave me the encouragement I needed to say, okay, I got a handle on it now. I was going through a little phase there a couple months ago, but I'm okay now. What I realized later, after I got sober, was that was backwards. My true condition was when the drinking was out of line. The temporary phase is what I had a handle on it. But I didn't know that. I didn't know anything about alcoholism really until after I got sober in AA. I saw something on TV once where only 3% of the alcoholics were Skid Row bums. I had a job, I had a car, I had an apartment, I had a bank account. They all looked like they belonged to a drunk, but I had those things. And the bank account was overdrawn. I recently had to buy a tire which cost more money than what that car was worth. The job was a little flimsy. And a couple years before that, the girl answering my phone was making more money than I was making when I got sober. My jobs got, and that's another thing, my jobs were getting smaller and smaller. I'm 34 years old. Most people in their late 20s, early 30s are getting bigger jobs as time goes by. Mine were getting smaller. I now know what that was. It's alcoholism. And at my first meeting, well, I'll get to that, but I was justifying all that. That's the other thing, justification and rationalization, 2 common characteristics every alcoholic I've ever known, either drinking or in AA. And, and what I was doing at the end of towards the end of my drinking, I was adjusting my standards to match my performance. Now, I knew that most people, especially at my age level, were trying to get their performance to hit their standards. I knew I couldn't do that. So I just kept on adjusting my standards to match my performance. And adjusting is an interesting word. I know what it means, to raise or lower. Well, I'm here to tell you, I was not raising any of my standards the last couple of years of my drinking. I was discounting them. And I ended up becoming somebody I never wanted to be. I kept on doing one more thing that I thought I would never do. My life was going downhill. That apartment, it was a furnished apartment with utilities included because I can't be blowing all my money on rent or furniture. I mean, I had to drink. I had a good job. I was making decent money. For a guy with no responsibilities, I was making good money. And, it had to be utilities included because if I don't pay, I want the lights to be on anyway. And then the last time I had to move, when I got that apartment, the last time I moved when I was drinking, I had about a month to find a place. And so I had my budget and that criteria. Then for location, it had to be within 2 blocks of one of my favorite bars. Now, I knew most people didn't do that. They wanted to be near a freeway, near a shopping center, near a school, near a bus line. No, I figured they just weren't very well organized. And what I understand now is whiskey decided where I could live. It was also just a few blocks from the Van Nuys jail. And it was the last time I was there, the cops treated me as if I belonged there. And that to me was worse than being there. They acted like I'm supposed to be there. The first time I was there, I was dressed better than I am tonight. I had cufflinks that matched, everything with handkerchief that time matched and all that stuff. But I just, again, I just kept on doing things that I thought I would never do. So after I got out of jail, I went to one of my favorite bars, and I hired the guy next to me to represent me in court. Now, he was a real lawyer, but this was my selection process, the guy on the bar stool next to me. Anyway, he moved to Vegas. I don't know if he's still alive. He's older than I am. Anyway, I've never seen him since I've been here. But but getting arrested isn't what got me to AA. I just, again, I could justify all that. The cop wanted his own TV show or something like that, and he was picking on me. Anyway, on Christmas Eve of 1983, I did one more thing I thought I would never do. And I was at a place called the Pineapple Hill. I was an original customer. I want everybody to know that. I don't know what it means, but they were in the news a few years ago during the COVID thing because there's also a restaurant. Anyway, and I always was at Chimney Sweep, which is a mile away on Christmas Eve, and that year I was too drunk to get to the Chimney Sweep 1 mile from where I was. And at that time, late '83, there was a series of bar holdups in the San Fernando Valley, and somebody came into the Chimney Sweep to rob the place. Now, if I had been there, I might have still thought I was a Marine and tried to stop the robbery. I don't know. Anyway, I did one more thing I thought I would never do. I think I got away with it. In fact, to my knowledge, to this day, I'm the only one who knew I did it, but that's the important thing. I have to know. I was analyzed after my third arrest by National Council of Alcoholism. The judge sent me there as part of my probation to be analyzed, and this guy decided I was an alcoholic. Well, it was one guy. I mean, if it had been a panel of 5 or 7, I might have paid some attention. One guy, and he wasn't even wearing a tie. He had an old sweater on. The carpeting was worse than this. I quickly dismissed him. I went to the chimney sweep and I asked the day bartender there, what do you think? He said, no, you're not good enough. The guy's a bartender, he should know. Well, before that, when I had the second arrest, a different bartender at the same bar, the chimney sweep, who later was the owner of the Pineapple Hill, he told me how to beat the case. And I followed his instructions, went down to and met with the city attorney and negotiated on my own, no lawyer, and I got exactly what I expected out of that. So I walked out of that guy's office thinking I'm Clarence Darrow, F. Lee Bailey, Johnny Cochran, all rolled into one. I've outsmarted the system. They can't get me. I say there were two more after that. I heard Chuck Chamberlain speak when I was about 6 months sober, and he would say that the only thing worse than bad fortune for an alcoholic is good fortune. And so I understand that. But anyway, so after that episode on Christmas Eve, I decided to quit drinking for about a month. And in the past, whenever I tried doing that, I usually would. I'd try it usually twice a year, January right after the holidays, and then June right after my birthday. And usually go a week, 2. Once I thought I went 3 weeks. That's not true. It was 3 weekends, which is like 16 days. But anyway, I thought it was 3 weeks. And I'm a trained accountant. I should know better. But anyway, I lasted 7 days when I set that goal of a month. And I didn't realize what that was about either. In the last year or two of my drinking, I didn't take any time off. I was too busy. But I now understand when I set that goal of 30 days and I only lasted 7, which really bothered me because when I set a goal before, I would hit it. I now understand that was the progression of alcoholism. I could no longer start and stop when I decided it was a good idea. The whiskey was deciding when I could stop. I didn't know that. Anyway, so I drank for 8 of the next 9 days. That first day I went back to drinking. It was New Year's Day. I marched through those swinging doors, crossed that carpeted floor, sat down on that padded stool, stared into that smoke-filmed mirror, and ordered some whiskey, doing some social drinking at 6:15 in the morning at Victory at Sepulveda. Tender Trap, not there anymore. And I was probably by 20 years the youngest person in the bar at that hour of the day. I was aware of that, and I didn't see anything wrong with it. Anyway, like I say, I drank for 8 of the next 9 days. 5 days before I had what turned out to be my last drink, I drank properly. I had a few drinks, I had dinner, had a few drinks, and I went home. Last 4 days was a drunk. I didn't know it was going to be my last drunk. I don't think I made it 8 miles from home in 4 days. If I'd known it was going to be my last drunk, I would have been a lot more flamboyant, gone out in style. Because I did have an image. That image almost killed me, but I had an image. I was labeled by that same bartender that helped me negotiate with the city attorney. I was labeled the Beau Brummel of Ventura Boulevard. I drank with a member of the Forbes 400. Not at the time we drank together, but he later became one. Grammy Award winner, Academy Award winner, and a lot of big name people from show business. I like to watch the old shows on TV, and I look at the credits and the writers and the producers, and the directors. Some of these are people I drank with. At the end of my drinking, at 6:15 in the morning, because the people I had a problem with there at 6. I had it under control. And but those people were out of work roofers and house painters. I used to say I drank with some painters, and somebody says, anybody famous? So, so I have to explain they were house painters. Anyway, and that's just what whiskey did to me. That's all it was. Anyway, I had my last drink on a Monday night. I don't know why the bartender decided to close at 2 that night, which is the law in California, but he either would close around midnight and go out drinking with us someplace else, or we stayed till 3 or 4. That night he decided to close at 2. And so I'm panicking because I'm not going to get another drink. And another bartender said, the only time you have a drinking problem is when you can't get another drink. Then you have a drinking problem. I related to that, yes. I used to carry his application for AA membership around with me for a number of years, but it's obviously too late now. I'm sure he's not alive any longer. Back when I worked in the Catskills in 75, 76, I had a friend of mine, Chris. He was a year younger than me. We drank together side by side. If one of us had 14 drinks, the other one had 13 or 15, and the next night it would be reversed. We were identical back then. He never stopped drinking. And I actually lived there for a year or two when I was around 21, 22 years sober. And he saw how I was living. I owned a house, I'm driving a new car, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, I don't know, sleeping in abandoned offices and stuff like that. And he explained why. I was lucky, and he had been in a slump. Been in a slump for a long time. And the sad thing is, he died 8 years ago. And look at me today. And we were the same 50 years ago. There's really, as far as I know, nobody left from my drinking crowd who's still alive. There's a few people I did some drinking with that are, like the billionaire. He's in his 90s now, but he's still alive. But yeah, he kind of drank with us. He'd go into the same bar, and he'd be there a couple, 3 times a week, and he'd have a couple, 3 drinks, and then go home. So he didn't really drink with us. That wasn't our style of drinking. Anyway, so that Monday I had what turned out to have been my last drink because I'm nice to those 4 people I'm drinking with. One I didn't like at all. Only one I cared for. And he was kind of a criminal. But, and I didn't get to never drink. That's the thing. It's a tough way for a big shot to end up. Being nice to 4 people you really don't care much about on the hopes of getting another drink and not getting it. But that was Monday night. I have no idea why, but Wednesday morning I had no thoughts of ever coming to AA. Wednesday afternoon, I decided I think I should go to an AA meeting. So I walked over to the phone booth, looked up the number in the white pages so that the phone company wouldn't know I was calling, put the dime in, that's what it was back then. I'm an old timer, 10-cent phone calls, and called the Van Nuys Central office. And they didn't have a meeting. I heard from the old guys I drank with, those guys were like 40 years old back then, about somebody they knew who went to AA. And that's all I knew about AA. And I thought they had meetings every hour, on the hour, like a commuter airplane or something, I don't know. I found out later they were noon and 8:30. And so they didn't have a meeting for me to go to. I thought it was a lousy way to run a business. I probably told them that and hung up. A few hours later, I knew if I didn't do something, I was probably going to drink, and if I drank, I might get into trouble. I went back to the phone booth, looked up the number in the white page, put the dime in, called the office, and they told me about a meeting. It was Wednesday night. It was on Lindley in Tarzana. A lot of people from the Valley Club went to that meeting. It was the Encino Tarzana speaker meeting, about 250 people there. They all looked happy to be there, which I couldn't understand. Some of those people, 2 men there were sober longer than I had been alive. One became my sponsor. A lot of people there were over, a lot of people with double digits, so a good number of people for over 20 years then. And I couldn't understand, if they were an alcoholic and they hadn't had a drink in that long, what were they so happy about? It almost seemed like maybe they were happy or looking forward earlier in the day to being there that night. I knew that couldn't be true. This is what I knew. And I sat at a table, and guess who's sitting at that table? 6 people at the table? The guy with the lousy sweater that declared me an alcoholic a couple years earlier. He didn't remember me, but I remembered him. I had to pay $35 for that evaluation too. Obviously, it still bothers me. And when I don't remember the beginning of the meeting, there had to have been birthdays, that many people, long-term sobriety. In January, there must have been multiple birthdays. Don't remember that. And they started to read the beginning of chapter 5. And I don't remember the text at all, but I remember when they got to step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. I immediately agreed to that wording. You know, my jobs were getting smaller, the apartment was getting crummier, et cetera, and I couldn't quit drinking when I decided it was a good idea to quit drinking. You know, I told you I was a Marine. I know all about discipline. I'm a qualified expert on discipline. I was taught discipline by masters. Didn't do anything for my drinking though, because I have alcoholism. I'm not a heavy drinker. Yeah, one of the kids I grew up with, I was 3 days older than him, you know, Little League and all that stuff together. When we were in our early 20s, we did a lot of drinking together, and his drinking was out of line when we were 21, 22, 23 years old. His drinking was out of line. Mine was still proper at that time, or mostly proper. When we were 25, 26, he got engaged, got involved in a family business, got married, became a father. He never quit drinking, but he drank properly from then on. He was just doing irresponsible drinking as a young man in his early 20s. By the time he got into his mid-20s, he'd grown up a little bit. But if you looked at us when we were 22, you'd think he had the problem and I was okay. Looked at us when we were 26, and that reversed. But anyway, so I knew my life was a mess, and it was because I couldn't control my drinking or limit my drinking. I tried not everything in chapter 3, but I tried much of them, plus a few of my own, and they all worked for a time. If any of them worked long-term, I would have never needed to come to AA. Anyway, that first meeting, a man gave me his card, his business card, wrote his home phone number on the back of it. I don't remember if the speaker was a man or a woman. I was a day and a half without a drink. I don't know what kind of a story they might have had. I'm still in contact with one of the women from that meeting. In fact, she was here a month or two ago, and Jane and I had lunch with her one day. And I'm in regular contact with her. She's my age, but she's 50 years sober now. And when she hit 50 a few months ago, she asked me to come out to the Pacific group, which is her regular Wednesday night meeting now, and present her with her cake. That is an honor and a privilege. For anybody to ask you to do that is certainly an honor and a privilege at that meeting, but for 50 years. Now, there's people in the group with more time than that, but it's still significant. Anyway, I thought that was kind of stupid of this guy to give me the card with his phone number on it, because I might call the office and report him, and that was Wednesday. Saturday, I called him, and the number was real. He answered the phone. Gave AA a lot of credibility. And I said, I think I should go to a meeting tonight. And so he told me what meeting he was going to be at, and I went, and he was there. Again, credibility. And then I've been going to meetings on a regular basis ever since. I went to 951 meetings my first year, 551 my second year. I counted them. I don't know why, but I did. And I didn't, the state of California, the county of Los Angeles did a group conscience and suspended my driver's license for a year, which ran 20 months. I still have a resentment on that one. They changed the insurance rules towards the end of my suspension. It delayed everything. I went to more meetings then than I do now, retired with a new car, you know. And people would say, but you really need to go to all that many meetings back then? I said, no, but I needed to be willing to. I've always been able to put AA first in my life, always. I've never been confused about my priorities when that goes. I told you I made those 2 phone calls to that central office one Wednesday afternoon. Wherever I've lived in 4 states. I've answered the phones at central office in 4 states for over 41 years to repay that 2 phone calls one afternoon. I call that AA math. I've probably had over 100 partners answering those phones, because in New York there were 5 or 6 of us in Manhattan. This is before everybody had the internet in their pocket, so we used to get a lot of calls. It's not that many now. I only knew 2 people that ever had that commitment that ever drank again. So we're talking about close to a 99% success rate. I'm sober since my first meeting, and AA has been my only answer. I've never had any voluntary therapy. I've had some therapy, but none of it was voluntary, and et cetera, et cetera. AA is more than enough for me. I'm living a life today better than I ever dreamed of lying about while drinking. You know, I met Diana at a Sunday night meeting in Bronxville when I was living in Connecticut. That was my home group. It was a different state than where I lived, but it was a good meeting. I liked the meeting. There were a lot of people there with time, et cetera, et cetera. And we were like AA friends for about the first year or so. We knew each other, then we started dating, and we've been together ever since. It was her idea to move to Vegas. She's a native New Yorker. She couldn't handle the New York winters. I grew up in Van Nuys. I could handle them fine. But I've been visiting here for a long time before we moved here. I've known Keith probably 20 years. Been living here 11. And so I knew there were people with time that were involved in AA here. New York, not so much. You know, I had 30 years when I moved. There weren't that many people with that much time, more than me, at the meetings. In Vegas, I see people with 50 years regularly in meetings. It's a strong AA here, because I never want to be one of those people who used to go to meetings. I've seen people like that. Some of them stay sober. They don't all get drunk. Some of them seem satisfied with their decision. But I've never envied one of them. That's the interesting thing. You know, I've put a lot of people in AA on pedestals, and it's always served me well. I had that first sponsor, Mike, and he was not a friendly guy at all. I thought he invented the phrase, sit down, shut up, and listen. I had him on a pedestal. Clancy, I knew him well. I didn't know him as a speaker. I mean, yeah, but I knew him as an AA member. I knew him as a sponsor. I was very impressed by his dedication. And then there's others. Big Jack, who lived here in Vegas just before he died. That was like 6'6", 325 pounds. He probably even went to the Thai Club or the Triangle Club, but he died in '92. I learned so much from him. And you know, I've had great examples, and I'm a product of Alcoholics Anonymous. The life Diane and I have today is unbelievable. I sometimes drive home and I look at it, I can't believe I live in this neighborhood, but we do. And you know, in a few weeks I'm going to Omaha for a business conference I do every year. I've been doing it for over 30 years. There's a lot of heavy hitters there. And it's well attended, it's tens of thousands of people. And I'm treated with respect there, and I'm thinking, if these people only knew, you know, if they knew what I used to be like, they'd throw me out of their town. But that's not the way it is anymore. Less than a year ago, I became president of the 1st Marine Division Association. It's an alumni group of 4,500 Marines, mostly combat veterans. We had 2 from World War II. They both died within a year of each other fairly recently. But we have retired 3-star generals in this association and retired colonels. And I'm the president. You know, 1 enlistment. Couldn't close the NCO club before I became one. But why did they do that? Because of what they saw the way I acted. I've learned this in AA, to be responsible, like Keith asked me, we set this date. That was it. Now, he wasn't a question about it. I forget who the fellow was that called me last night once to make sure I was going to be here because he doesn't know me. If anybody knows me in AA knows if I say something, that's it. I have that kind, and I really enjoy having that kind of a reputation here, and that's carried over in my business life. I've made deals on the phone or via email, which should be notarized. They usually later are, but the people take me at my word, and then we'll complete the paperwork when we get around to it. And I say, I'll be 77 next month, and I just don't believe it. I've outlived almost all of my relatives, and I never thought that was possible. One of the things I was concerned about, not enough to do anything about it though, was my mother, I was 3 years sober, 3.5 years sober when she died. And I was nearby, so I was able to see her and this and that. And I'm sure that she was no longer worried about me, no longer embarrassed because of me, no longer ashamed of me, because I was sober 3 years and she saw the change in me. Because I know other people whose parents die, it's just all because of Alcoholics Anonymous. I say I've had great teachers here, and it's just I can't say enough good about it. And the life I've got today is just I've become one of those people I used to hate listening to. I'm living a life better than my wildest dreams, And they told me I made the greatest group of friends I could ever hope to meet here, and I didn't say it, but I'm thinking to myself, there's nothing wrong with the friends I've got now. 42 years, I haven't gotten one call from the chimney sweep, how you doing? Anyway, again, thank you, Keith, for inviting me. We're supposed to hate each other because he was in the Navy and I was in the military, but we get along because it's AA.